Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Future Plymouth 2030. My name is Miles Noble, and I'm here to take you through the webinar this afternoon. Today's episode sorry, turn off the music. Today's episode is Reduce, Reuse, and Recycle, and how we are dealing with our waste. And this webinar is proudly sponsored by Interreg, the European Regional Development Fund, University of Plymouth, and Recon Soil. So thank you very much for sponsoring us. Today we have some fantastic guests with us as usual. We have, first off, we will have Paul, Carey and Jane Ford from MVV Environment Energy, from Waste in Plymouth, who will join us to explain the pros and cons of preventing our household waste from going to landfill and using it in a productive way to generate heat and electricity. And then we have Professor Mark Fitzsimons from the University of Plymouth. He's going to talk to us about the importance of understanding and using and protecting our soil to prevent soil degradation and also being considered as construction waste. And then finally, we'll have Adam Willetts he's an architect from the successful regeneration company Urban Splash, renowned for bringing redundant and historic waste buildings back to modern day use from all over the country. And he'll provide a narrative on their ethos and examples of their own work here in Plymouth, such as your Rawlham Yard and Civic Centre. So again, thank you to our sponsors. This is also the Recon Soil Low Carbon Technology Network event. So thank you very much for sponsoring us. As usual, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the programme. Please feel free to ask a question at any point in the programme. So just by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, or raise your hand. I know I try and get you all to raise your hand at the end of the programme, but please do. We love interactivity, or just chat in the chat box. Yes, without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Jane and Paul. Over to you.
Hi, I think Jane, you're going to begin our presentation, I believe.
Oh, there we go. I am indeed. Sorry, I just couldn't unmute myself. It kept telling me the host had muted me. So thanks very much, Miles. Thanks, everybody. Obviously, I can't physically see you, but it's nice to be with you this afternoon. On the scale of the 3 R's that Miles was just talking about, reduce, reuse and recycle, we actually sit fourth. We recover energy from the residual waste that can't be recycled. So just to go through a little bit who we are, what we do, how we do it. I work for a company called MVV, which is actually a group of 250 companies. We're a global company, but originally established in 1873 as the kind of town works company in the city of Mannheim, which is in the southwest of Germany, taking over the gasworks, bringing power to the city. The initials MVV stand for Mannheimer Verkehrsgesellschaft, which literally translates as Mannheim's Transport and Utilities Company. So you can imagine the other things, bringing water and sewage system and also the transport network. Some of these things are historic now, but we are, in fact, the 3rd largest utilities company in Germany. So any utilities company obviously will be dealing with waste. And in the 60s, the German government said we have to stop landfilling. So an alternative, you think historically, the human species on this planet, what have we done with those things that we don't want, use or need anymore? We've either buried them or we've burned them. But the innovation comes with recovering the energy through burning them. So using the heat from burning the waste to generate useful energy in the form of electricity and or steam. So our first facility in Germany was commissioned in 1965. So compared to the first CHP facility in the UK, which was commissioned in 1974. We currently operate 6 facilities in Germany. 3 of them are energy from waste, so dealing with residual household waste, and 3 of them are biomass facilities, so dealing with waste wood that can't be used or recycled anymore. However, in Germany, Recycling efforts have been successful. There's a good balance. They do not need any additional residual waste treatment facilities. So in 2007, MVV as a company were looking for other markets, so other countries that were struggling to manage waste in a sustainable manner, so particularly still using landfill as a solution, and UK was one of those. So just to have a look at our other operations. So as I said, third largest utilities company in Germany, but also third largest district heating provider in the Czech Republic. And now we have 3 operational facilities in the UK as well. And of course, the best of those is the one in Plymouth, but don't tell my boss, Paul, even though he's sat there. So Plymouth, the facility in Plymouth was actually a flagship project for MVV. It is the first design and builds that MVV have undertaken outside of Germany. Alongside that, the biomass plant in Kent. So these 2 were commissioned at around about the same time in 2015. And our newest facility up in Dundee was commissioned at the beginning of this year. So that's dealing with waste from Dundee City and Angus councils. So the 2 energy from waste facilities are council contracts, and so they're dealing with household waste. Ridden Dock is a merchant plant that's dealing with biomass. So I mentioned 2007 when MVV were looking for new markets. Coincidentally, that's exactly the time when Plymouth, Devon and Torbay councils were also looking for an alternative to landfill. Landfill in Plymouth, the last bit of landfill at Chelsea Meadow would have been in 2008. So they were preempting that. They realised that there was going to be a need for a solution, and they went out to tender. We were one of a number of companies bidding on the project. It was a PFI project, so these don't exist anymore, but private finance initiative means they were looking for a company that would stump up the investment to build a facility on their behalf to be paid back over a period of 25 years, which is the waste contracts that we've got with them. And the capacity was set to be 170 to 200,000 tonnes per year. So they formed a partnership, Plymouth, Devon and Torbay. Together they are the South West Devon Waste Partnership. So excuse me if I shorten that to our acronym, which is SWIDIP. SWIDIP, the South West Devon Waste Partnership, representing Plymouth, Devon and Torbay. And initially it was to deal with waste from South Hams, West Devon, parts of Teignbridge and the 2 unitary authorities of Plymouth and Torbay. So geographically, you might think, why on earth would you consider building such a facility in Plymouth then and move all that waste, all that distance? But actually, when you look at the figures, half of the waste that the South West Devon Waste Partnership are bringing to us is actually generated in Plymouth itself. And there are a number of reasons for that, things like population density, houses of multiple occupancy, lowish recycling rates in the city, and all of these things contribute. So from 2008 to 2015, when we became operational, all of that waste was being trucked down to Liskeard. So as well as the fact that it was still being landfilled, there was a huge carbon footprint associated with that. And we, of course, as I've said, sit 4th in the waste hierarchy. However, people often ask me, there's a real contradiction here. You're a business that uses waste as a fuel, yet you're trying to encourage people to recycle. Why on earth would you do that? But you have to think about it in a slightly bigger picture way. Ever increasing population means ever increasing amounts of waste overall. So unless we increase the bits that are at the top, so buying less stuff, reusing things as much as possible and recycling where we can, and the councils all provide recycling services, we could potentially end up with the facility that we've designed not being big enough. And that would be an absolute disaster, because the capacity going forward was designed with these increased recycling rates and better waste management overall, better attitudes to waste management factored in, of course. The location, many of you in the audience may remember, this was somewhat controversial, so just stuck an extra label on there that shows where the facility is, EFW plant, in relation to local housing. And the hill where there's the arrow that says my house, that's actually Barn Barton, which is a predominantly social housing estate. And at the time the planning application went in, there was huge concern about having something like this right on the doorsteps of people living there. But it was really important to MVV to really maximise the efficiency of this facility, get as much useful energy out of it as possible. And in Plymouth, we happen to have Western Europe's largest naval base. And that dockyard has always had a steam heating system, which used steam generated by their own fossil fuel boilers historically. So being able to, at the time potentially, but now in reality, deliver steam from our process direct to them for heating enables us to almost double the amount of useful energy that we can get out, but also reduce the carbon footprint of the dockyard and reduce costs to the dockyard as well, as we're part renewable energy. I think over the last 6.5 years that we've been operational, we've successfully shown that we can be part of the community that we operate in. You know, I have to say I was concerned 11 years ago when the planning application went in, but through talking to people, through listening to answers, I have to say through talking to the right people as well, talking to people who know about these things, talking to officers from the Environment Agency, talking to people in waste departments of councils, really helped me to understand the need for facilities like this. We just have to move away from landfill. The carbon footprint of landfilling is massive. We don't physically have the space. And even once a landfill site is full and capped, you still continue to deal with methane and leachate, but for decades afterwards, that land remains unusable. So I think I went on my own journey of understanding, if you like, and a huge part of my role now in Plymouth is waste education, changing behaviours to waste, helping people to accept that we exist. You know, pre-COVID, and that's a whole other thing that I will briefly touch on later, we were averaging about 3,500 visitors coming through our doors, including about 250 for our annual open day. So I think that's a good sign of acceptance. And I think actually it's now something we should be quite proud of in Plymouth, that we have this sustainable waste management facility right on our doorsteps. Of course, for the councils, not only was there an environmental benefit, there was an economic benefit as well to moving away from landfill, because as you probably know, in this country, the government puts tax on landfill, ever increasing taxes on landfill. And this slide just gives an indication of how the councils have achieved some financial savings. So if you look at the red line there, that was their prediction of costs every year, year-on-year increases with continuing to landfill. The blue line was their outline business case. So that was where they knew they'd have to spend some money to procure an alternative, but they would avoid landfill tax. And it was, I think, deliberately conservative because they didn't really know, but we were able to provide our own business case that said, look, just continue to landfill for 3 years while we build you a new facility, and then you will immediately start to achieve huge savings on the cost of dealing with your waste by sending it to us. And you can see the potential impact that continuing to landfill would have had on council taxpayers there as well. So we had, of course, key targets, key dates. So in April 2015, we achieved what's called readiness, which means we were able to start bringing waste in, burning it, and going through the final process of commissioning and testing the plant. First waste on the grates was the 15th of May 2015. I'm not a complete geek, it's just it happens to be my wedding anniversary, so I will always remember it. And then once we've been burning waste, we then have to prove all of our safety systems, fire systems, air pollution control systems, etc. And you can see from the slide, acceptance testing was completed on the 10th of September and services commenced on the 11th of September. And that's service with a capital S to the client, which is South West Devon Waste Partnership. The targets that were set for us effectively, that we agreed to from the councils, are shown there. And I will show a slide in a moment about how we perform against those. The gentleman driving the crane on the right-hand side there is a very fine gentleman indeed, but he's not a very good crane driver. That's all I'm going to say about that. But I think he enjoyed his time with us. So what do we do with this waste? Once it comes into us, it's delivered in via our tipping hall into a waste bunker, mixed by an automated crane, lifted into a hopper, and it falls down onto a moving grate. So the moving grate is like a series of steps, and it works just like a penny falls machine. Every other step is moving very, very slowly, shuffling the waste down. We burn about 30 tons of waste an hour at temperatures of around 1,000 degrees. And it takes an hour for the waste to travel across the grate. And a heat from that waste fire is then doing what any fuel in a power station would do. It's generating steam to turn a turbine and drive a generator. And you move on to a slightly more technical version of that cartoon. So this is more of a schematic of the actual process. So we've got waste acceptance into the bunker, lifted by grab, down, burning on the grate there. So just above the fire there, you can see a little yellow blob. These are diesel oil burners, and this is how we start up, because you can't just put waste on a grate and throw in a match and hope that it's going to safely burn. There are absolute minimum temperatures for burning waste. It's entirely and thoroughly regulated by the Environment Agency. Waste travels across the grate, gets burned. Of course, there is ash left over, and this falls off the back end of the grate onto a conveyor which sits in a water bath and is taken away into a separate bunker, because that is still not a waste, that is still a resource. That incinerator bottom ash, or IBA, gets taken off site for processing, actually goes to Marsh Barton in Exeter, and all of the metals are recovered for recycling, and the ash that's left over is then graded by size and used in the construction and aggregate industry. The heat from the waste fire is then drawn through the boiler by an induced draft fan at the back end, so raising the temperature and pressure until we reach 420 degrees and 60 bar pressure, which is what goes off through the steam turbine at the top there. The flue gases, of course, do need to be cleaned up. So any combustion process will produce oxides of nitrogen. We need to reduce those to free nitrogen and water vapour. So we do that in the combustion chamber itself. And then we'll also have acid in the gases. So these are the two things, the oxides of nitrogen and the acid, that we're actively controlling for. And to neutralise the acid, we have sodium bicarbonate, which then is a simple neutralisation reaction. Acid plus alkali equals salt plus water plus carbon dioxide. So at the back end, we have a filter system, 2,400 filter bags coated with activated carbon. And these will mop up, they actually absorb, I suppose, like a giant sponge. I think that's Paul's phrase, isn't it? Things like heavy metals, any dioxins, furans that have reformed, particulate, all of the things that we don't want to go up the chimney. So that is our waste. That is the waste from the process. And that's between 1% and 3% by weight of the waste that comes in at the front end is actually going away in sealed tankers as a hazardous waste. In this country, goes to hazardous landfill site, because that is pretty much the only thing that we can do with it. Interestingly, in Germany, they can treat it so that it's not hazardous and seal it in what literally look like dumpy bags and use it as backfill in the old salt mines to stabilize the ground. So we have been sending 1 tanker a week over to Germany. We need to now look at the carbon footprint of that transport to see whether it's offset, being able to define it as recovered rather than residual and therefore disposal. And then, of course, we monitor very, very carefully what goes up the chimney. That's all reported to the Environment Agency, and we even report weekly averages on our website as well. So operational performance, and this is, since we had our first full contract year, so contract year runs from the 1st of April to the end of March. So we're looking across the top at tons of waste diverted from landfill. I mean, numbers are the numbers, obviously. The amount of electricity we've generated, the amount of steam, as I said, steam export to the dockyard benefits them, but in engineering terms, it benefits us because we're much, much more efficient. We could still, and in fact are still exploring future opportunities for some additional district heating in the local area. There's some new housing being built next door to the site. Nothing is agreed on. I'm not trying to say that anything is yet, but it remains an option, and I'm sure Paul will be happy to talk more about that later on. You can see also the savings in tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent, and this is compared to the transporting over long distances, landfilling, which produces methane over decades, as opposed to, I'm not going to pretend we don't produce carbon. For every tonne of waste we burn, almost a tonne of carbon goes up that chimney. And again, Paul will be able to talk a little bit more about the future of our industry. Looking at complaints, somebody might want to pick up on that. So just to preempt that very first year, those 85 complaints, I'm almost surprised it was that few, because we have, during normal operation, we draw the smelly air from the tipping hall and the waste bunker into the boiler, and we use it for combustion. So we literally are burning the smelly air. During a shutdown, there's no fire, so we can't draw the air for combustion, but we can draw the air through that same pathway and put it through a good filter system, which cleans it up and neutralizes any odor that's in it. So the carbon filters that we had installed from the beginning were supposed to have a life of something like 5 to 6 weeks, and we shut down for 3 weeks. But what happened in reality was that there is so much dust, I suppose, in the air that's coming from the waste bunker and the tipping hall, that those carbon filters were blinded in the first few days. So we then had to continue with the shutdown for 2.5 weeks without really any good way of controlling odour. You can see by the following year, of those 11 complaints, I don't think a single one was associated with odour, because we simply spent the money that we needed to improve that filtration system. And the first thing was to put a sacrificial fabric filter in front of the carbon filters so that we could take out the majority of the dust, and then the carbon filters could do their job properly. And you can see, unplanned shutdowns were pretty bad a couple of years and reduced, but nobody likes an unplanned shutdown. Scheduled maintenance is the way forward. And then, as I said, waste education is really, really important. I think most facilities like ours now have somebody that does a role similar to mine, because it's so important to understand that this is just an alternative to landfill. And I would be quite happy, and I hope Paul's not terribly listening too much, I'd be quite happy to be put out of a job in 15 years' time, because people are not producing residual non-recyclable waste anymore. Unfortunately, I'm not overly hopeful that that will be the case, and that there will still be a need for these facilities going forward. But working really closely with the councils, even where, for example, recycling collection systems are different, there's still a consistent message about moving up the waste hierarchy. Don't buy stuff, reuse everything as much as possible. Do take advantage of your council's recycling system, but do be careful what you put in there, so that you're not contaminating a whole load of recycling that somebody in the flat above might have very carefully sorted, for example. And you can see some numbers there. The ILC is our incinerator liaison committee, and that's actually how I originally got involved in this project, was joining as a resident in 2011, I think, to, as I said earlier on, to ask those questions of the people that can genuinely give me answers, to be able to ask questions of the Environment Agency about how waste sites are regulated. I wasn't a waste geek 10 years ago. I'm guilty as charged now. But you can see we have good numbers of people coming through the facility. I would say actually at my capacity, I couldn't possibly fit any more site visits into a normal year. And then COVID happened. And we actually took the decision a week before it was announced nationally that we needed to really protect our key operational staff, who then quickly became known as critical staff on site, and then there were key workers as they were branded. And I think if I'd presented this 2 years ago, nobody would think, what on earth is she talking about, working in bubbles? But the long and the short of it is we have a team of 12 people who operate the power station side of the facility, and in normal times during the day there would be 4 out of 12 up in the control room. And it's not a tiny space, but it is a place where cross-infection could easily have occurred. So we took the two that were dealing with safety, so the permit team, down into what is actually my lecture theatre, because I was at that point working from home, to keep them separated. So I think what they, well, I don't need to think about it. I know what they say to me is that lockdown was really lonely for them. It was like working a permanent weekend where they're just a team of two. They don't see anybody else, they don't interact with anybody else. But some of you will know that we do have lovely lights on the side of the building. We do use them for certain celebrations, and we use them twice for the NHS, once for clap for carers, and once for the NHS's birthday, in fact. I think I'm right in saying, and I'm sure again, Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, that nobody in our company was furloughed. So non-operational staff, yes, had to go and work from home. So things like finance, we still receive invoices, we still pay them, we still have to bill our customers, we have to still pay our providers. So those sorts of things. Administration is still a requirement. You know, a lot of people's roles didn't change very much, except that they were working in a different environment, different physical environments. And we achieved uninterrupted, I'm happy to say, delivery of the service to Swidip in terms of receiving waste, treating waste, and generating power. I think probably my role changed more than anybody else's, because I couldn't bring anybody to site. Virtual meetings became normal. I think there were some real silver linings. So when I do virtual site tours, of course, I'm not restricted in the numbers that can come on a virtual site tour. So I run virtual site tours with whole schools, you know, 200 children at a time, which I can't physically do here on site. But it's not the same, I would say. It's definitely not the same, although we will keep them. Some virtual work experience. And I think probably one of my personal greatest achievements, I feel, is really having realised the opportunities to take on interns and apprentices, because we always said we would do this, and we honoured that commitment through helping other companies to employ apprentices. But as our business changes and our business grows, we managed to take on a business support apprentice, and the two ladies on the right in that photograph at the bottom are both doing internships with us. So just a sort of 12-month placement related to their studies, which are environmental science and built environment. And then I've just put a slide on the end. I don't know if you want to talk about it, Paul, or just leave the pictures up there for people to ask about. But I've already mentioned carbon dioxide from chimneys. So the next sort of innovation for our industry, I think, will be carbon capture. I know that we're also looking at hydrogen as a fuel, because you can use electricity to generate hydrogen. And of course, food waste collections are being introduced across the country. Anaerobic digestion as well might become much more prominent and might be in need of investment and expertise that we might be able to bring. And that is it for me. Thank you, Miles.
Maybe I could just jump in and add a few words just to clarify one thing, to preempt any questions. When Jane showed you the cross-section of the facility and we talked about the oil burners, those oil burners are only used during startup and shutdown. We don't use oil or any other fossil fuel during the normal operation. So once the waste is alight, it burns itself. The incoming waste, which is necessarily damp, it depends what people put in their bins, that comes in and is dried on the first section of the grate. The fire tends to be in the middle of the grate, and then in the last third, it tends to be just the embers, which if you come and visit us, and anyone's welcome to come and visit us at any time, you can actually go and see the fire close up. You've got a thick piece of glass in the way, but you can see it, you can hear it, you can feel it. So I would strongly recommend that you come and visit us. That's the best way to understand what we do. I don't know, Miles, whether we should be answering some of the questions that were in the chat boxes by chatting or by talking here. I noticed someone asked about emissions, talked about toxic emissions, and just a quick word on that. Yeah, what goes up the chimney, there does include stuff which you would be rightly concerned about, but they are at very, very low concentrations, and we operate well below the permit limits set by the Environment Agency, without which, if we don't get those right, we will shut down. So we never go beyond the limits. And we have monitoring systems that prove that all the time. The emissions do go up into the air and they disperse into the environment. And depending on the wind direction, they will go, they'll follow the wind, of course. You mentioned plume plotter. I would caution against relying on that. It's a very basic bit of software that uses weather data to simulate where the plume goes. We have the analysis that we put into our planning application, which we can always show you. It's still available. Plume plotter dramatically uses red colors for the highest of concentrations, making it look like it's really dangerous and alarmist, but these concentrations are really, really low. So that you really should not be concerned about this. And people like Public Health England have already made statements to this effect. So I don't want to sit here and lecture anyone on what Public Health England have said, but basically it's, if I was worried about air emissions, I'd be worried about diesel cars rather than what we produce. And on the subject of the future, yeah, carbon capture clearly is something that people are starting to think about. It's something that we're certainly thinking about. It does involve what is essentially another chemistry set. We already have one big chemistry set on the back of the facility between the boiler and the chimney, which treats all the emissions and makes sure that we don't put these emissions up into the air beyond the limits allowed. Carbon dioxide can be removed from the flue gas, but it requires another chemistry set and quite a bit of footprint, which at Plymouth might be a bit of a challenge. And it then also takes quite a lot of energy itself. So you're using more of the useful energy that we produce that we currently send to the dockyard to capture the carbon. So there's a lot of complex arguments to be had about carbon capture. Hydrogen is relatively easy because we've got electricity and you can make hydrogen with electrolysis. So that's actually technically very easy to do, something we're looking at. Anaerobic digestion is not what we do here in the UK. Our parent company in Germany does some anaerobic digestion, and we might do some of that here in the UK, but it requires you at home to separate your food waste. So you need to put your food waste into separate bins, and the council needs to have a system of collecting that food waste and then presenting what is essentially pure food waste, hopefully without plastic bags, without plastic wrappers and stuff like that. If that can be done, then you can have a very efficient system of digesting that anaerobically and producing methane, a biogas, which is a mixture of methane and carbon dioxide. And that might well happen in increasing quantities if the government enforces local councils to source separate food waste. And then the other question I saw in the chat room was about different levels of different methods rather of recycling. And again, that's something that the government is saying it wants to harmonize. It's true that across the country, each authority makes their own decisions about what they will ask you, the consumers, you, the residents, to separate at source. It varies. Where I live in Cornwall, we have to do a lot of recycling, and I know in other parts of the country, very little is done. So it depends on your council, but the government is talking about harmonising this and making councils stick to a single system, and that would certainly make it easier to recycle. Everyone would have the same understanding, and maybe that way we could increase levels of recycling. The emphasis I'd like to leave you with is that we're not trying to compete against recycling. We're not here to stop recycling. We would encourage recycling. What we're here to do is to stop landfill and to discourage landfill, which is the worst of all options. So instead of dumping it into a hole in the ground and leaving it there for years and years and years, we get rid of it. The volumes of ash that we produce are much smaller. They can be used, as Jane said, and we get very useful byproduct in the form of heat and electricity, which at the moment is mostly taken up by the dockyard. So it's all about reducing landfill, not reducing recycling. I shall leave it at that.
Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Jane. That was really interesting. I know for on your anaerobic digestion, actually, I know we're doing that locally at the moment at Langage Farm. I don't know if you guys have heard of that.
Yeah.
Really
I think actually Langage, I'm fairly sure was designed and built with food waste collection from the city in mind, and then it didn't happen. Yeah. And now it's taking commercial food waste. So our food waste from our site, we separate and it goes to Langage, and the electricity they generate powers the ice cream factory, and I think it's absolutely amazing. So
it is. I've had the privilege of visiting there. You need a strong stomach.
Yes, you do. You don't need a strong stomach to come and visit us.
No, I definitely want to come and visit you guys. I'm really interested in this. And so is Linda, actually, and she's asked my question. When is your next public open day? Maybe we should all go together as a future Plymouth. We should organise some ceremony.
Yeah, I was going to say, have your own bespoke tour.
It has been suggested.
I usually do the open days in a school holiday, so that it's a free activity that local families can just come down to. And I haven't decided for sure. I'm still a little bit nervously looking at what the cases and deaths and hospitalisations of COVID are doing. You know, it's much worse to organise something like this and have to cancel it when it's a big event, or to become a spreader event.
Yeah, we have had open days and we will have them again. So, but we're very happy to receive smaller groups, and just call us and make a date with Jane.
Maybe we could put something on our website, and if anyone of our viewers would like to come visit, we could get a group together.
Someone just asked a very quick question, if I may jump in, about traffic movements. Sure. Typical lorries in a day, I think in the planning application, and it's still true today, it's in the order of 130 plus or minus HGVs a day. But an HGV includes the refuse collection vehicles that are going around the streets of Plymouth. So they're already on the roads, and they used to go over to Chelston Meadow. Instead of going over there, they come over to us. Obviously, extra vehicles are coming into Plymouth from Devon and Tor Bay. All that is part of the 132. Is there an ambition to use electric vehicles to reduce emissions? Yes. I don't know where Plymouth City Council themselves are, but some local authorities are beginning to use electric vehicles. Up in Dundee, where we have a facility, the local council is starting to use electric vehicles. There's two types. There's battery electric and there's hydrogen electric, which would produce hydrogen, may be produced by us. So there could be a nice virtuous circle there. If we produced hydrogen that was then used by hydrogen electric vehicles by Plymouth City Council, that would be great. But that's coming, but I can't tell you when.
Yeah, they're not to forget, they're not our vehicles. They're the council.
No, we don't do that. That's the council's bailiwick.
Thank you, guys. I'm sure you'll have loads more questions for Paul and Jane. So please put them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and we'll ask them at the end. So please send them through. Thank you so much. So before we go on to Mark, I just want to quickly show some really nice images from the other day. Sarah, our producer, and Claire from Low Carbon Devon went to plant our tree. As you know, we won the Abercrombie Awards last year for best response to the climate emergency, and part of our award was to plant a tree. So just thought I'd show this. It's really cool. So what did we go for, Sarah? What kind of tree was it? Are you still there? The old green gauge.
There you go. Green gauge. They were.
Was that your choice?
Trees. Yeah, it was actually. They had a mixture of fruit trees, apples, pears, and plums, and they're concentrating on increasing a nice orchard at the moment. So it's lovely. I've marked where it is on my what 3 words, so I'll go and look for it in the future.
When can we expect a little crop?
I'm not sure, but they were very keen to have more people planting. So I was also thinking about a future Plymouth 2030 planting event maybe, but we're at the end of the season now, so it'll have to be later in the autumn. So watch this space.
Nice. That sounds great. We'll tie it in with our open day as well. Okay, yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much. Again, keep your questions coming in. So next we're going to go over to Professor Mark Fitzsimons from the University of Plymouth. He's going to talk to us about the importance of understanding and using and protecting our soil to prevent soil degradation and being considered as a construction waste. So over to you, Mark. Sorry, Mark, if you just don't go and unmute yourself.
I'm unmuted now.
Lovely, yes, that's fine.
Okay, great. Still learning about Zoom.
And that it's very new, isn't it?
So thanks very much, Sarah and Miles, for inviting me to this really interesting session. Certainly interesting so far, and looking forward to the next presentation after mine. I'm really see my entry into soils as a fairly recent development of the last 10 years of my career, and most of my career has been involved in research into chemical processes in the oceans and estuarine waters. So opportunities aligned roughly 10 years ago for me to move into this area. So I wouldn't describe myself as a soil scientist. So some things I'm open to learning, but in terms of chemistry, a lot of things are similar. And I would say that many things are more challenging working at sea than working on land, as the recent storms might indicate. So what I want to talk about today is an area that is into its third phase of funded work, really, if you consider the projects, and we're kindly funded by Interreg for our current work. And initially it started off as a PhD project with the Eden project that was supported through the European Social Fund between the University of Plymouth, University of Exeter and Eden project. So what I'll talk about is some background to this subject, and it's really interesting. I never envisaged that there would be such a connection with events like this, and intersectionality and interest from different professional community areas, public sector. That's really interesting. It seems that soil management and soil health and wastes are really resonant in all sections of society currently. So our current project is called Reconstructed Soils from Waste, or ReconSoil, and I will talk about rationale for that and for looking at the subject of using waste materials to reconstruct soils. I'd just like to acknowledge Kate Schofield and Jennifer Rhymes, who have worked on the project with me from its beginning. So I've got 3 screens here, so I'm moving things around to make sure. Have I gone to slide 2?
Yes, that's right. I want to click just from the current slide over the top left there.
Yeah, are we on slide 2, background?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So soil degradation is a global problem. There's a number of pressures that are combining to make this a global issue. Firstly, we're well aware of the continual increase in world population, which leads to the need to feed that growing population. And as that happens, climate pressures in many places are leading to soil degradation, such that it can't fulfill the functions that it is currently marked out for. And that doesn't, we're not even discussing the natural functions that soil provides, such as flood management, water purification, and hosting biodiverse ecosystems. So healthy soils are key to food security, and that is something that has been on the agenda for a long time. The current geopolitical events are indicating how fragile some supply lines are. And the UK exit from the European Union has also led to discussion on how food security can be maintained. So I just wanted to use one example of a soil type and the way that it has been used. And we've got peatlands, which are on our doorstep in Dartmoor National Park. As ecosystems, these are key for the storage of carbon, or what we call carbon sequestration. They build up carbon and store it, and as such, ensure that that carbon does not return to the atmosphere either as, for example, carbon dioxide or methane. And the move towards protecting peat is growing, and that is because it has been consistently used as a component of compost for a considerable period of time. And also it has been a substrate, key substrate for operations such as mushroom production. Now, taking it from its natural environment to use in this way, either commercially or at a personal citizen level, I would say is not sustainable with the declaration of a climate emergency, if such a declaration is to be other than rhetoric. So I've used that as one example where alternatives are clearly needed if current practices are to be maintained, but to become more sustainable. And Jane gave a much nicer representation.
So sorry to interrupt you, Mark. I don't think your slides are following your presentation.
Okay.
It's somewhere on the second slide.
Okay. So is that working? Is that
no.
through?
No, you might want to just click on the top left there saying from current slide, the button.
Okay, I've got
the screen
still up. My apologies for this.
That's that one there. That's it. That one.
Okay, is that showing you is that the peatland slide?
No, sorry, Mark, no.
Okay. I will rectify this. Okay, can you see that now? Peatlands, the one beginning with peatlands?
That's it, perfect.
Okay. Too many options.
Too many screens, Mark. I'll let you carry on. Sorry to interrupt you.
Indeed, they're normally quite useful. Thanks for that. So I say that alternatives are needed to maintain, to work towards this sustainable operations that are currently requiring precious soil, natural soils. And as I mentioned, Jane gave a nice, what is known as the waste pyramid, to show that prevention is the main target of the Waste Framework Directive. Although the UK has left the European Union, we're still operating within the similar legislative framework until that changes, if it does. And this indicates that the prevention of waste is the ideal, and disposal is the least favoured option, and the regulation, as far as possible, is set up to prevent that, to discourage it, certainly. So we're in between those in terms of waste generation and disposal. The use of soil, the reuse of soil, is somewhere in between. So Miles had said, we've already had a technical challenge, but Miles had set up a poll for me, I think. So if you'd all like to have a guess, no Google, please. There's no, don't worry if you don't get it correct. It's just to get your impression of how much landfill, how much soil made up the landfill volume as a percentage in 2020. Just give you a few seconds to answer that. Okay, do you have a result? Okay, that's interesting, because the actual volume was 58%. Okay, so soil is a lot of soil is going into landfill, and I would say that indicates that we have a problem as a society in valuing this as a resource. So thanks for your participation. Those of you that are local may have visited the Eden Project. As I mentioned, that was the first, my first work in this area was in collaboration with the Eden Project. We've continued to be partners. And it is an area of almost 8 hectares divided into 3 different biomes, 2 of which are covered, but all of which use reconstructed soil, which I've described here as artificial soil. And they have deployed 83,000 tons, approximately 83,000 tons of soil, reconstructed soil, since 2001. So just over 20 years. So the Eden Project is a pioneer in this area, and if you've been there, you'll see that it supports a really wonderful display of plants from around the world and locally. So initially, although the Eden Project had developed the soil, the commercial needs and the time pressures meant that there wasn't really a chance to, other than to deploy it and see if it works, to get a more detailed look at how that soil might perform. And the first project was an attempt to do that with the objective of optimizing the soil, if at all possible. And we had our idea as a perfect soil that would have a large reservoir of nutrients that were released as the plants needed them, and therefore minimized the use of the need for applying fertilizers externally. And so through that project, we wanted to make a good assessment of how the soil was performing from a chemical point of view, be able to optimize the design, which we were able to do, and also subsequently think about economic opportunities. And I'll just, I've got a couple of figures in a slide that'll come later on that may be of interest. So the large amount of topsoil that was required would really have needed a very big translocation from somewhere else, and taking topsoil from another environment would certainly have gone against the ethos of the Eden Project, which was about sustainability. And so the soils that were made were constructed using waste materials that were sourced locally. And I've just given an example. Some of these companies no longer exist, so I won't go through all of them, but the composition was sand, lignite, clay, green waste, which can be produced pretty much everywhere, and also composted bark. And so that mixture, it also took advantage of Cornwall's historic industrial heritage and also current operations. So as a scientist who's used to working in the laboratory with all sorts of precautions against contamination, this was a bit of a culture shock to prepare a sample in this way, but that was the way it was done. So I got used to it. And basically it was a matter of bringing all the materials together and mixing them in the proportions that I have shown here. So with composted bark and green waste making up 65% of the material. So it had a high organic component, more than most soils. And when those soils were made, we packed them into columns that had about 70 centimeters of the soil that was packed homogeneously. And then the orange square below indicates that sand was down below, just to help with irrigation, because we were going to collect the soil leachate. And up at the top, those circles were marbles, just to make sure that the water flow wasn't channeled and didn't carve channels in the soil. So high technology. And so our initial experiments were set up like this. We had a number of columns, and they were to be irrigated, so watered regularly, and following the protocol that the Eden Project used, and keeping that at pH 7, which again was the pH of the water that was being used. And then that could be equally distributed over the cores as needed. And then at the bottom, we have leachate collection. So that's the soil water that was passing through the columns. And this gives us, this is like our forensic look. This gives us an indication of any changes in the soil. We can measure concentration of carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, for example, in solution, and see if that indicates that changes are taking place. And if you're interested, I've just given the reference for that, the paper where we published this research. There's a lot of data here, and I will show not a tidied up one, but one without the variability in it. But I'd just like you to look at the nitrate at the top. So we're measuring that through the 12-month period, and also organic nitrogen and organic carbon, but particularly interested in the nitrate. Now, what we did was had the columns being watered without any intervention for 6 months. And after 6 months, we fertilized half of the columns, and we used the same fertilizer that the Eden Project was using, and that was an organic fertilizer containing nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. So the green circles are the fertilized soils, and the orange circles are the unfertilized soils. So these circles, they're the average values. And so we saw the nitrate in the fertilized soil going up in our leachate that we were collecting. And that wasn't surprised, because we were probably adding more nitrogen than the soil needed. And so some of that was being altered and transformed to nitrate and released. What we were surprised about was that our unfertilized soils were also increasing in nitrate. The soil water we were collecting was also increasing in nitrate, and we weren't expecting that. So that was my first real conundrum as to how to, in terms of interpreting processes in soils. So this is the same data, but I've just taken away the variable, the error bars that measure variability, just to show the mean values and the difference. And hopefully you can see that the concentrations at the end of our experiment, which the 12-month experiment here, were quite similar, whether the soil had been fertilized or not. And so in both cases, the soil was leaking nitrogen. And for the fertilized soil, it looked like it was saturated with nitrogen, therefore it was removing the excess nitrogen. But in case of the unfertilized soil where nitrogen hadn't been added, it was becoming carbon limited. And that means that the organisms in the soil don't have enough carbon. So they are taking organic nitrogen molecules like proteins, taking the carbon out of it, and then rejecting the nitrogen as ammonium, which is then quickly removed to nitrate. And nitrate is it's very mobile in soils and finds its way out of soils into surface waters. And that's why we have so much legislation that regulates the spreading of fertilizers, for example. So following that, the last part of the work was to test how biochar might improve the soil so that this nitrogen loss and carbon loss was reduced. And we did a number of different applications of biochar from 0 to 10%. And this is just some summary data from the addition of biochar at 2%. And we found that the leached nitrates, so the amount of nitrate we measured in our soil water, was reduced by 10%. And also the leached carbon was reduced by 35%. If you remember that carbon was likely being used by the organic nitrogen molecules were being used for their carbon, and the nitrogen was being rejected. Being able to actually conserve the amount of carbon in the soil is likely to be a positive outcome in terms of retaining this nitrogen. So what we're doing now is to we've done a number of experiments now looking at biochar from the beginning and comparing its efficacy with the soils without biochar. We're exposing them to different climate pressures like flood and drought, which we are seeing. We've seen these very dramatic and distressing pictures over time in different parts of the world. But in the UK, we're now experiencing perhaps shorter term periods of flood and also drought. So this is a very real issue here at home. And so we want to look at the resilience of the soil under those pressures. And just the last data slide, this is, and I think, a nice way to demonstrate a potential biochar effect. These are the same soils, reconstructed soils, that have been treated with different applications of biochar. This one is 4 kilograms per meter squared, and we can see that this has suppressed the enzyme of organisms, fungal organisms, that are known to break down lignin, which is the more kind of residual organic matter like bark. So suppressing this type of activity may help to stop a soil from moving into carbon limitation. So finally, just put some numbers up. It's interesting, and these are the back of the envelope calculations, and I used this number to put into our Reckon Soil bid. But based on the amount of soil that the Eden project has deployed, its cost of manufacture, which is these are approximations, and also the approximate cost of imported topsoil, which I got from searching some prices on the internet, and also putting in a landfill tax for that, describing it as active waste. That would lead to a landfill tax saving of 7.5 million. So apart from the moral obligation to divert wastes from landfill and the sustainable as a sustainable option, there's also an economic incentive for this to happen. So looking forward, we would like to be able to produce a sustainable soil. Making it from waste materials gives us the opportunity to optimize, to add our own ingredients, as it were, and also to optimize them. And we feel that this could be a source of topsoil when all the necessary checks have been carried out, for for the private citizen who might want to revegetate their a garden or a space, right through to perhaps ecotown development. And we would love to have in the Southwest a centre of excellence where we could push this research forward and hopefully create a global technology. But as you can see, simply mixing wastes together might look good in term as a product, but we do need to have a real understanding of how the soil is going to perform under different circumstances and pressures. So thank you very much for your attention. And sorry for the technical, my inability to monitor multiple.
No, it was fine. Thank you so much, Mark. That was brilliant. I'm going to do something a little differently today. I'm going to have some questions just before we go on to Adam, because I know you have to pick up your children soon, Mark. Masamba, are you there on the line? We have a live question, hopefully, if you're there. Maybe not. No, that's fine. Okay, we'll come back to you. Just a question from James, actually, Mark. He says we're installing a green roof with sedums as a base plant. What type of soil would you create for healthy soil? What type of soil should I use for healthy soil?
For a particular plant?
Yes, yeah.
Oh my God.
For like a green,
that's a gardener's world question.
Is it?
if you knew what James, what was what it needed to contain, I could advise in that sense in terms of proportions. But other than doing some quick googling and bluffing, I wouldn't be able to. I mean, this soil is a basis for, at the Eden Project, for a whole range of plants. Say in the Mediterranean biome, the soil is adapted to have to represent a more sandy soil, I believe. So okay. Small adaptations are made even in the within that system itself. But I think one of the benefits of, if you know what you need, one of the benefits of making your own soil is that you can optimize it. So I'm very happy to help you going forward. If you can tell me what you need.
Cool. Send us some more information, James, and we'll try again. Thank you so much, Mark. That was really interesting. Please keep your questions coming in. We'll try Masamba at the end. Let's raise their hand there. Finally, last not least, we have Adam Willetts from Urban Splash. Adam, over to you.
Oh, there I am. Sorry, technological problems. Afternoon, everyone. I think my presentation is going to be the least scientific of the ones today. I'm probably the least qualified as well, given some of the information that's gone before me. I guess really what I'm going to be showing you today is 25 years or almost 30 years now of how Urban Splash as a business has been. If I can get this to work, 1 second.
Our slideshow at the top there, Adam. 6th one along, 7th one along.
Can you see that okay, Miles? Working okay?
Yeah, all good. Thanks, Mark. Adam.
Perfect. Okay, cool. So yeah, I mean, the subject today is about reduce, reuse, recycle. I'm about to show you over the course of the next sort of 25 minutes how, as a business, we have tackled some of the most historic built country, repurpose them, transform them, use them, sell them, save them. And I'm going to touch a little bit in the end how as well about how we actually build into the future as well, and how in building the future we're looking at ways of building really efficiently and using the least materials or the least waste to do so. Because clearly, as the construction industry, of the 1,000 tons I think that we of waste each year that we get through in the UK, I think 2/3 is the construction industry. So clearly we have a massive role to play in reducing our CO2 emissions. So Urban Splash, we've been going for 30 years. We're a North-based company, and the figures speak for themselves. We've done all sorts of projects over the UK, mainly in the regional city centres, from our first project, which was a bar in Liverpool, to 500,000 feet of office space from 6 motorway in Birmingham. We're currently operated in regional cities. It's our heartlands, and as you can start off in the northwest and spread down slowly but surely into the southwest in Bristol and Plymouth. We see this all the time. All the projects we come across, we're told it will never work. It's our core to arms. It's a it sort of drives us on. Most of the projects we deal with are traditionally in really challenging regeneration areas, or we're almost become a developer last resort because they're historic buildings that have fallen into so much disrepair. It's really challenging to bring them back into use. So it will never work. It was the title of our 25th year exhibition. It's what drives us on, and we're here all the time. So where did we start really? Well, the early days, there wasn't a clever scientific strategy or business plan. We just wanted to turn amazing historic structures that we saw up and down the country, and originally in Manchester and Liverpool. We wanted to just turn great old buildings into amazing places to live, play and work. And we've worked on some pretty exciting buildings over the years. As I say, historically up in the northwest are old mills, warehouses that a lot of the industry at the time, back in the early 90s, said, no one would want to live in these buildings, no one would want to work in them. Let's knock them down. Let's just build new build. We thought differently. We could see that if you put a lot of love and attention into these buildings, they could be easily salvaged, reused, repurposed, and have a long, strong future. And some of our buildings now we're on the third cycle of sort of refurbishing them and keeping them relevant. But you can see a collection of our buildings here. and how we've repurposed them. And you know, clearly as we got onto something, we got excited, we got passionate, we started to win awards, and we took on bigger and bolder challenges, and not just one building, but regenerating whole areas, often working with the best designers or the best younger coming architects and delivery teams to get the best out of these amazing historical assets. And we've got a strong relationship of working with the public sector and councils up and down the country, and particularly Historic England, in bringing these buildings back to life. And we're not, this is the Matchworks in Liverpool, the last matchwork factory in the country. And you can see here this image, one of my favorites is, we're not afraid to think outside the box, and actually our architects aren't afraid to work with us to be bold and exciting about the new narrative we add to it. A lot of the historic buildings we've repurposed. These pods, for example, contain all the toilets and the kitchens, so that the actual Matchworks factory can remain fairly free of services, and you're just left with great office space to work in, as you can see in that top corner there. And you know, these just a selection of the mills we've refurbished and created places to live, and particularly in, I guess, Manchester, Liverpool, and Birmingham, where even as more recently as the 1990s, you know, people weren't living in the city centres, or you know, so a lot of our buildings, a lot of these mills, these old factories in the city centres, we repurposed into mixed use schemes at a time when mixed use was a relatively sort of low used word in the industry. And see the state of some of the buildings we found and worked on. This is Manningham Mill in Bradford, an old silk mill which has been repurposed into residential accommodation. You can see that urban splash and boldness, not being afraid to add a new history to these buildings. We've touched all sorts of buildings over the years: Victorian warehouses, flatted factories. We've even had a go at Art Deco, and we repurposed the Midlands Hotel and brought it back. Originally planned to launch urban splash hotels. We wanted to do loads of them, but I think this was a good reason to stick with what we knew best. We actually ended up working with an operator who took on and ran the hotel. We just refurbished it. And now we're sort of getting into projects we've worked on in the southwest. This is Lakeshore and Bristol. For anyone who's a fan of the American School of Architecture, and in particular Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, I think this was their first building outside of America in the UK. An exoskeleton Corten steel frame. It was British American Tobacco's offices in Bristol. And it was left unloved once the factory was demolished and Hammerson's built a shopping centre, and we've lovingly restored it with its artificial lake and created homes and apartments and brought green space into the building and kept the frame on show for many generations to come. So that was the sort of the early days and where we started. I think as we got into the 2000s, we got a bit more sophisticated. It started to become a bit of a strategy. We started to get bolder and bigger in some of the projects we took on, such as Fort Dunlop here in Birmingham, based, where we got a vertical business park and we put in really exciting infrastructure. And we actually put one of the largest green roofs on this building, or sedum roofs, to encourage biodiversity. And we also came in on the back end of the regeneration project. For anyone who knows Birmingham, Hammerson's had done the Bull Ring, the New Street Station, and we managed to introduce city living in Birmingham in a sort of a well-known iconic building, the Rotunda, which was a circular office building. It had fallen into sort of, I won't say disrepair, but it was fairly unoccupied, and we managed to create some really cool apartments in the centre of Birmingham. And I guess this project particularly has a lot of relevance to Plymouth, because I see many parallels in what we're looking to do with the civic centre, and take what is an abandoned office building and reintroduce exciting city living and stitch the building back into the city centre. And I'll come onto that a bit from. And we got still taking on one of the largest buildings in Europe, Park Sheffield, an icon of post-war revival in Sheffield, a very modernist building, which in the very early days, 1,000 large flats in Sheffield city centre, when they were knocking down the dilapidated back-to-backs and rehoming people in good quality accommodation. And in the early days, it thrived and was successful. But sadly, for lots of the economic reasons, it got into decline and got into this condition. And, you know, this is a project we've probably been involved with now 15 years and worked with the council, Historic England, lots of partners to bring love and TLC into and breathe life to what is now, again, a thriving set of flats. But we've also now got really great ground floor commercial uses. We've got some student housing in there of a real high quality, and it will be to everyone's tastes. We're trying to expose the fabric of the building, the concrete. We've got a bit of a fetish for concrete at Urban Splash. We love new old, and you can see sort of sustainable is with interest into the ground floor of this trans community, nursery. Everywhere needs a good restaurant, shop. Sort of a bit where we come from and some of our bold projects we've developed over the last 20 years. Recently, I guess we've got back to our roots, and we've kind of gone back to repurposing old mills. There's Bobbins Mill in Manchester, where we literally left with a brick structure, and you can see the condition in, and we've repurposed it with some quite raw materials. We salvaged a lot of the old features and fitting structure and created some really beautiful, bright, airy office space. And also at the same time, we you know, some of the old mills in Liverpool and Manchester, which we've converted into office space, they're coming to sort of 20 years post their conversion, and obviously with prior to COVID, clearly we were seeing a change in people's work, and so we're having to continually repurpose our buildings to be fit for purpose. And here, what we've done is we've taken out space in the building to provide breakout areas, more cycle storage, and continue to breathe love and affection and care into these assets to continue to sustain them and be occupied for the future. And you can just see some of that great space. And one of my favourites, we've had a go at all types of historic architecture. Why not have a go at 1990s business park architecture? We've all seen them up and down the country, often call centres. It's amazing what you can do with a tin of paint and some vision and a bit of boldness, and stripping out some of those horrendous sort of 70 ceilings or 90 ceilings, I should say, and just bringing the building back to its bare components and just creating really nice, airy workspace with some of that breakout area that people want to see now. And you know, people don't just want to come into an office and work at a desk. They want to go into breakout space. They want to have amenity space. And I guess a perfect sort of coming together of what we've done and showing everything in one project is here it's down where everyone is in Plymouth. I'm not there today. I'm down next week. Is our Royal William Yard. You know, we've been involved in this project now since the early 2000s. Hopefully, everyone knows Royal William Yard in Plymouth on the peninsula. A great collection of buildings. It's got everything we love and look for, and next to water, you know, it's that heritage history, and you know, we've been involved working very heavily with really supporting partners in Plymouth or Historic England in those last 20 years to surely bring most of the buildings back to life. And you can sort of at the end of the tunnel now in completing the yard. Images obviously from a few years ago, showing hopefully if you went there today as well, a thriving, really sustainable destination of office, restaurants, apartments. There's a hotel, but that wasn't all the case. This has been a challenging project. You have projects like this for the long term. They take a long time. The easy bit, if people before was putting apartments into these buildings, they lend themselves to great apartments. That is a bit. I think the challenge in how we create future by being offices on here, commercial space, having restaurants, visitors, and we've done that through a lot of with independents, some mainstream partners. We've also created office space for small businesses. I know started out in the building here, and we've also got bigger offices for more mature and large businesses. I don't know what's happened there. I'll start again. And then something a bit different, we work with a charity group to try and retain artists and try and salvage some of the more dilapidated buildings with a more light touch raw approach, not necessarily creating sort of grade A office space, but creating space that allow these buildings to come back, but space that that artists could comfortably work in and provide a roof over their heads and keep this talent in the city. And in more recent times, we've now started to introduce, we've got some hotel space and some quite exciting infrastructure. Sustainability isn't just about energy efficiency for us of buildings or less waste. It's how you continue to make sure these buildings don't fall empty and have a future. And one of those ways is that word that's bounded around placemaking, but bringing people in. And one of the issues with the yard is because it was military, it was very defensive in nature, and we've tried to break down some of that sort of connection by having the stairwell, the boardwalk, and having the events all year round, that give it that heart, that soul. So we have hopefully many of you have been down there and experienced the food markets, the circus we have every year. We've had art, we've had theatre, we've had a light show that's now well established and continues to come back. And we've had more mainstream shows, which all go into that mixing part of creating a place, but sustaining it and keep getting people to keep coming back and enjoying these buildings. And we've done most of the things, and that's close to my heart for the last is it's always the finishing touch really to the yard. This is a project that's the piece of the estate overlooking the basin. We've done most of the basin, both sides of the basin are now animated. We want to finish that off with bringing forward Melville. As I say, it sits at the heart of the yard. We want it to be that centrepiece. It's a large building, it's challenging, but the plan is we're literally finishing half the building as we speak, transforming what are amazing, incredible spaces, this amazing canvas. And what we're essentially doing is trying to do more of the same, really, more great ground floor restaurant space, retail space, really exciting, sustainable office space. And we've also, we keep moving this, we keep pushing on with the yard and how we sustain it even more. And we're looking to introduce, we are introducing a cinema into the top floor of this building. So a place very much, as I said at the start, going back to, the no strategy approach, just a great place to eat, work and play. But it is a challenging building. It's not, we're not going to do it in one go. We're phasing it. We're doing half the building at the moment. And in current progress, we've been building this now. We've been on with this project now for about 2.5 years. A lot of attention goes into the areas no one ever sees, reusing the Welsh slate, trying to reuse most of the roof materials and repairing the stonework. But we're slowly but surely coming to completion of phase 1, which is due to complete next month, and add more fantastic space to the yard. And probably one thing we've tried to do here, keeping the building for us is the most sustainable thing to do in the first instance. But a lot of what you can't see, we've tried to be more energy efficient in terms of putting more insulation to the roof and get it up to the best standards you can. The eaves, really energy efficient boiler systems. All the sort of tick box standard things, but they all help. PRR lighting. And clearly it's keeping the building, all the embodied energy is highly sustainable. But here you see sort of some of the final images of the building coming to completion next month. And I think if everyone can bear with me for more minutes. Where does future life for Urban Splash? Well, I guess sustaining our heritage will be around with us forever. It's in our DNA. 2022 is a big year for us, particularly with another project we've got in Plymouth, the Civic Centre. It's a love-hate building, Marmite building. I love it, but I do love modernist concrete buildings. A bit like Rotunda, that the plan here is been in the press. It's bold, but it's a chance to use a building that was the beacon of city's revitalisation post the Second World War. We think it can be used again, revitalise the city centre in a changing future, and re-stitch it back into the city centre with a vibrant ground floor of restaurant, retail, office space, and then the tower with great apartments. It's as I say, it's a Marmite building, but we love that concrete structure. We're currently working closely with the city to start with this project, bring it forwards. Hopefully, in the coming period, with sort of getting onto site and starting to strip it back to the concrete frame. But yeah, a great asset for Plymouth, and one we're really proud to be involved with and excited to take forwards. And literally, I'll whiz through these last few minutes. I know today's about reuse, recycle, but an important part of our business going forwards, and probably about 70%, is housing, but creating design-led sustainable housing. And as you see, we've always think outside the box. We've always innovated, and we started to look. We've done apartments, we've done offices, conversions. We've never really done housing up until about 2005, when we repurposed about 300 back-to-back terraces in Salford, where we built over the back-to-back rear yard with a central garden. And put the living rooms on the first floor, bedrooms on the downstairs. They were called the upside down houses, but everyone loved them. It was a really exciting and fun way of repurposing terrace houses that were about to be knocked down. And it got us thinking about housing. And at the same time, we also were thinking about how we built. We built our first modular apartment scheme working with Yorkon in Yorkshire, because we wanted to look at innovative ways of constructing and being more efficient in how we build. And I guess those two projects stirred something in us, and we started to think about, well, can we get into the housing market in terms of standalone houses, because we were looking around, and when we were looking at Chimney Pot Park and looking at some house builders are better than others, but a lot of the housing up and down the country is very standardised. It's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It's poor specs. It's not very flexible. It's not very adaptable. It's clearly not very sustainable in terms of the way it's built the same way we've been building housing for hundreds of years, which is very energy inefficient. And so we came up with a new concept, House by Urban Splash. We effectively want to create an affordable design-led housing, but a sustainable, but a house that gives people choice and flexibility, effectively a kit apart. And essentially that's what we're setting out to do now. Alongside repurposing buildings, we want to create beautiful communities up and down the country, using the most efficient construction method possible, which in our view is MMD. We want our buildings to be green by default, design-led, modern, contemporary. I'm conscious of time, but I can send these slides around for people to look back on later. But how did we start? So we thought reinvent effectively the terraced house and go back to basics. Let's sell space rather than this obsession with selling rooms. So let's give people the opportunity to buy 1,000 square and repurpose it how they want, or 1,500 square feet. We also set out to, a bit like Chimney Pot Park, design something so people could decide how they wanted to live. They could live in the garden, and they could have their living room downstairs and spill out onto the garden, or they could have their living room upstairs and have the bedrooms downstairs. Literally, the choice is theirs. And effectively came up with a chassis that, you know, you could buy a very beautiful open plan ground floor, or you could upspec, a bit like when you buy a car and you upspec island, and be a bit more cellular, how you want that space configured. The choice is yours, and there's lots of permutations you can pick. And I think relevant to today's discussion is, and I'm sorry for putting people off their tee here, but you know, you can't tell me, looking at these images, that's the best way of building, the most efficient way of building, and it's not wasteful. And we, and along with a number of other developers, we've been challenging and asking that question, and we just thought, well, how do we build our houses? If you can build a car in a factory in A380, why not build our houses under controlled conditions where we can have less waste, we can control snagging, build efficiently, not be affected by the weather. And that's what we do. We build our modular homes in a factory in Derbyshire using standard builder components. They all come together on a production line. There's less transport going to site, less wet trades, and literally it's plug and play. And again, I'm just conscious of time, but here's an example of the scheme I'm working on in Birmingham called Port Loop, where literally the modules come, they're put in place in 90 minutes, 3-story home, and over a course of 4 or 5 weeks, they're zipped up and they have homes ready to go, move into, with beautiful green spaces, beautiful defence gardens, very unashamedly modern, contemporary, won't be for everyone. But I thought everyone would be interested to see how we're not just repurposing old buildings and salvaging buildings sustainably, we're also thinking to the future and how we build homes for evolving society, a growing society, and how we deliver quality, airy, light-filled, modern homes. And hopefully everyone has found that interesting, and I'm more than happy to answer questions at the end. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Adam. That was so interesting. We're so blessed to have you with Urban Splash in Plymouth. I think what you've done with Royal Yard is amazing. Certainly been a big part of my life, and I think we're all really excited to see what you do with the Civic Centre. And it's put on, I don't necessarily you know much about the plans, but is there going to be some sort of restaurant or viewing platform on the top, Adam? Can you tell us any of that?
Yeah, that question comes up a lot. I think I could spend hours talking about how restaurants on roofs and all the kit and kitchens you need and the access. I think in the end we came to the conclusion that what we're going to do is there's going to be we're going to repair the rooftop and we'll provide access a number of days over the course of the year where the open days people in the public can come and get up onto the roof and it's the views. You know, it's a building. It's going to be very highly costly to develop, and obviously you've probably seen in the press we're looking to use some grant funding to bring it forward. So we thought I use that word a lot today. The most simple way without putting lifts was, you know, the way to getting people up to the roof, probably to just offer repair it, restore it, and have open days throughout the year.
Sounds brilliant. When are you looking to start on it, Adam?
Yeah, I mean,
was that quite a big question?
Yeah, I mean, we're working towards starting our site this year with the council. I'd hope we're a couple of months away. We're starting some sort of early enabling works. It's going to be a long-term project, that one. It's going to take a couple of years. But yeah, watch this space.
Cool. Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Thanks for sharing all of that with us. Please,
I'm conscious I went through 230 slides and I don't know how long, 25 minutes. So if any, I can.
That's got to be a record, Adam.
If I can circulate that power pack or PowerPoint, if you know, people can look at the imagery if they want in less time, in more time. So
That'd be great. Yeah, send it through, and we'll put it on our website under this program's details, so people can download that. Thank you. That'd be really nice. If anyone has any last questions, please put them through now. Meanwhile, I'll talk about the next webinar that is on the 6th of April, so Wednesday, 6th of April. Again, at the same time at 4 o'clock till 6. The topic of this one will be future electricity use and generation. With us will be Associate Professor Martin Hand from the University of Plymouth, who's going to discuss the potential for energy generation around our coasts and Plymouth's floating offshore wind test facility. We'll also have Adam Longfield, Senior Consultant of BRE, National Solar Centre and Project Manager of Southwest Energy Hub. And he's going to enlighten us on the developments and the opportunities for energy generation by solar means in the Southwest, with an update on proposals at Chelsea Meadow by Philip Morris. And we'll also have Imar Manouni, Director of and Head of Building Performance at Hawley, who's going to talk to us about the future all-electric home or building might look like and the changes for all of us to consider. So again, that is Wednesday, the 6th of April, same place, same time. Please register on our website, futureplymouth2030.co.uk. Just have, so one question from Madeline. So probably go for you, Adam, again. Do you take into account the social impact of developments, gentrification, for example? Tongue twister there.
I mean, like everyone, we're quite conscious. We want to try and, you know, with sort of environmental, social governance policy, but you know, what does that mean? How do you assess it? How do you assess what you're achieving? Because, yeah, we can give everyone stats on how many buildings we've regenerated and how many square feet and how many awards we've won. But, you know, what you know, how do you then measure all the other things that come about through regeneration? Yeah, clearly jobs, you know, but how do you, you know, for example, at the Yard, you know, we work with a lot of independents. So there's some charity groups. You know, how do you measure all the impact that you're having on that? That I'm just using the Yard as one example. I've got numerous projects where, you know, what's the impact on the area over time, and it's a really interesting question. I don't necessarily have the answer, but it's something our consciousness and with a way of measuring, you know, how impact ESG point of view. Yeah, I mean, the gentrification point, it's a difficult one, that one, because we, you know, I think we just start off, what's the first point? If we've got to salvage these old buildings, we've got to repurpose them, bring them back into use. The impact of doing that beyond is a little bit out of our control to some extent. Our first priority is let's salvage these buildings. So if we don't, they're going to be lost forever. You know, and but the impact beyond that is a difficult one for us to control and have an impact on. It's probably not answering the question, but you know, I think we sometimes we can't. If we focused on that, we might not bring these places back to life. And I suppose gentrification has two impacts, doesn't it? It's in some ways it's a good thing, but I know in some eyes it perhaps isn't, because but what I'd say on that respect is our developments aren't just the one part of society. We try and deliver them throughout their lifetime to try and touch as many parts of society as we can in terms of, and you can see at the Yard, for example, the different types of occupiers, the different people using the buildings, living there. Yeah, so probably I'm waffling on now, so I hope that's answered some of that question.
Thank you, Adam. And finally, I suppose I know we've got the Civic Centre and Melville, but what's next for Urban Splash? Is you know, regards to project-wise?
Well, I think that'll keep busy. Certainly me busy for a few years. Civic, Melville, we've got a bit of Thatch Bridge as well down in Plymouth. I think we're still keen to keep doing and working with partners on great assets that need salvaging. But as I showed you, we're quite keen to deliver modern new communities with innovative construction methods. So certainly the house business is quite an exciting for us, and we want to be doing that down the country.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, Adam. Alan Willetts, Jane Ford, Mark Fitzsimons, Paul Carey, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to you as well for watching. Please join us for the next one, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Cheers.
So